My wife, Emily, was the kind of woman who could turn heads in any room she entered. She was sharp, ambitious, and always seemed to have a clear vision for what she wanted in life. We had been together for years, and I truly believed I knew her better than anyone else. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. At the time, I couldn't have imagined how drastically my life was about to change. Our daily routine was well established. Emily worked at an office downtown, constantly surrounded by people, meetings, and deadlines. Meanwhile, I worked from home as a software developer, thriving in the quiet comfort of my own space. We were different in that way. She enjoyed the hustle and social energy of her career, while I preferred structure, solitude, and predictability. Despite our contrasts, I thought we balanced each other out perfectly. I've always been a traditional, straightforward guy, the type who values loyalty, structure, and order. To me, marriage was a partnership based on trust, a commitment to weather life's storms together. I never entertained drama, never sought out surprises. I lived by the idea that if you do the right things, life should unfold as it's meant to. And up until that point, I believed Emily shared the same values. She, on the other hand, was more open, more extroverted. She had an innate ability to connect with people, to charm them in ways I never could. She loved conversations, networking, always working on new projects with an enthusiasm I admired. In some ways, I thought her sociable nature complemented my more reserved personality. She nudged me out of my comfort zone just enough to make me feel like I was growing, but not so much that it felt forced. Still, deep down, I had always been a cautious man. I never trusted easily. It was just how I was wired. But Emily, she was the exception. She was the one person I had given my full, unwavering trust. I never imagined she would be the one to break it. Now, as I look back, the signs were there. Subtle at first, easy to dismiss. I had every reason to see what was coming. Maybe it was my own stubborn belief in the way things should be, or maybe I just didn't want to face the possibility that my wife could betray me. Whatever the reason, I missed it. I ignored what was right in front of me. There was one detail about our relationship that, in hindsight, shaped everything that followed. After a few years of trying to start a family, we learned the truth. I was infertile. We went through every test, every consultation, until it became undeniable. The news crushed me. For a man who prided himself on control, on being able to build a secure future, it was a devastating blow. Emily, however, took it surprisingly well. She assured me it didn't matter, that we could explore other options. Adoption, she said, was always on the table. She was the type of woman who looked for solutions, not problems. And her unwavering support made it easier for me to come to terms with reality. We even talked about visiting an adoption agency when the time felt right. She told me, "It's not about biology. It's about love, about us," and at the time, I believed her. Over the years, we accepted it. It became something we rarely even talked about. I buried my feelings of inadequacy deep inside, never showing weakness. And she never seemed to mind. In fact, it became somewhat of an unspoken agreement. We were free from the stresses of unexpected pregnancies, and in some twisted way, it even seemed like a convenience. Because of my condition, we stopped using condoms altogether. There was no reason for them. It was a change at first, but eventually, it became second nature. Emily never questioned it. If anything, she seemed relieved, like this was one less thing to worry about. We both agreed it was just another way our relationship adapted to the circumstances. Looking back, I realize how much I took for granted. I was so sure of her, so convinced that we were in sync. I saw no reason to doubt her loyalty, especially when this routine had been our normal for years. I assumed we were on the same page. After all, we had discussed it at length, and she had never given me any reason to think otherwise. But what I thought was a sign of trust would later turn out to be my first real clue that something was wrong. The change came gradually. Emily started coming home later than usual. At first, it wasn't drastic. Maybe 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. She explained it away with work, saying her company had taken on an ambitious new project that required extra hours. She called it the most important project of her career, something that could finally put her in the position she had been working toward for years. Her passion seemed genuine, so I didn't question it. Emily had always been driven, and I had always supported her ambitions. If this was her big moment, who was I to stand in her way? But as the late nights became more frequent, something about her demeanor changed. It was subtle, her excitement felt rehearsed, her explanations just a little too polished. Yet, even then, I ignored my instincts. I chose to trust her. I had no idea that my wife's so-called career-defining project was nothing more than a cover for something much darker. And the night I found out the truth was the night everything changed. The night everything shifted. Emily came home late, far later than ever before. But that wasn't what shook me. It was the state she was in. She stumbled through the front door, barely able to stand. The smell of alcohol hit me before she even spoke. Her purse was missing, and she didn't seem to care. Her hair was a mess, her clothes slightly disheveled, and she could barely string a sentence together. Emily never drank like this. Ever. She had always been the type to stay in control, the kind of woman who had one glass of wine at dinner and called it a night. The only time she drank were on special occasions, and even then, she knew her limits. Seeing her like this immediately set off alarm bells in my head. I helped her to the bedroom, laying her down carefully while she mumbled incoherent words. She tried to pull me closer, her breath thick with liquor, pressing a clumsy kiss to my cheek. It felt forced. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something beyond the alcohol. I didn't react, not outwardly. I simply tucked her in, watching as she passed out almost instantly. But that night, as I sat alone in the living room, my mind raced. Who had she been with? What had she been doing? Her long hours, her sudden changes in routine, it all clicked in ways I hadn't let myself acknowledge before. The easy answer was right in front of me, but I still fought it. Maybe she had just gone out with coworkers. Maybe it was a one-time thing. I wanted to believe that. But deep down, I already knew better. For the first time, doubt began to take root. I had spent years believing in my wife, never questioning her motives, never thinking she was capable of deception. But that night, for the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility. And once the doubt was there, it didn't go away. The next morning, she woke up with a pounding headache, groggy and disoriented. She barely looked me in the eye as she muttered something about a work event that got a little out of hand. She gave me a weak smile, an apology that lacked real substance, and then disappeared into the bathroom. I didn't push her. Not yet. Instead, I waited. And that patience paid off. A few days later, I was cleaning out Emily's car, going through the usual mess, old receipts, forgotten water bottles, loose change, when my fingers brushed against something unusual in the glove compartment. I pulled it out. A condom. At first, I just stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was holding. Then, I found the open pack. A few were missing. We hadn't used condoms in years. There was no reason for them to be there. Unless... I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. It wasn't the kind of anger that flares up and fades. No, this was something deeper, something sharper. A calculated fury. That's when I found it. One more piece of evidence. A used condom, tucked beneath a stack of crumpled napkins. My stomach twisted. This was it. Proof. Emily hadn't been working late. She hadn't been caught up in some once-in-a-lifetime career opportunity. She had been with someone else. I closed my eyes, gripping the edges of the steering wheel as I let the reality sink in. I could have confronted her right then and there. I could have stormed into the house, thrown the evidence in her face, demanded answers. But I didn't. Because suddenly, I saw things differently. If she had been playing me for a fool, if she had thought she could sneak around behind my back, then she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I wasn't going to just sit back and let this happen. I was going to make her pay for it. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the condom packet in my hand, my mind racing through every possible reaction I could have. I could confront her. I could throw it in her face, demand an explanation, watch her squirm under the weight of her own lies. But that wasn't enough. I didn't want an argument. I didn't want some pathetic excuse. I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal in a way she'd never forget. And that's when the idea hit me. I grabbed a sewing needle from the small repair kit in the garage and, with painstaking precision, I punctured tiny holes into each remaining condom in the packet. If she was going to keep sneaking around, I would make damn sure there were consequences. Would it lead to anything? Maybe. Maybe not. But it was a risk she would have to live with. I put the box back exactly as I found it and walked back inside, forcing my expression to remain neutral. Emily was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware that her world was about to start crumbling. I kept my plan to myself, waiting for the right moment. And that moment came sooner than I expected. Emily had been talking non-stop about an upcoming work presentation. It was the presentation, the one that could make or break her chances of getting promoted. She had poured everything into it, obsessing over every detail. I realized this was my opportunity. I waited until the night before her big day, pretending everything was normal, acting like the oblivious, trusting husband she thought I was. And then, while she slept, I set the next part of my plan into motion. First, I called our bank and reported her credit card as stolen. They immediately froze her account for security reasons, a process that would take at least a few days to resolve. Then, I went outside and let the air out of both front tires of her car. Not slash them, that would be too obvious. Just enough to make sure she wouldn't be going anywhere without a serious delay. By the time I was finished, everything was in place. And all that was left to do was wait. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of her phone alarm blaring. Emily shot out of bed, immediately launching into her usual morning rush. I watched from the doorway as she hurriedly applied makeup, muttering about how important this day was. Then, as she reached for her purse, she noticed something was off. Her card wasn't working. She tried it again. And again. Nothing. I could see the panic setting in as she frantically dialed the bank, her voice shaking as she explained the fraudulent freeze on her account. Next came the real kicker. She grabbed her keys and bolted outside, only to stop dead in her tracks when she saw her car. 2 flat tires. The frustration on her face was priceless. She stormed back inside, her tone sharp. "My tires are flat. Have you seen anything suspicious outside?" I looked up from my laptop, keeping my expression calm. "No, haven't noticed anything." She let out a frustrated sigh, pacing the living room, her hands on her hips. "I can't be late today. This is the most important meeting of my career." I just nodded, suppressing a smile. "That sucks. Maybe call a cab." She shot me an irritated look but grabbed her phone and started searching for a ride. Minutes later, she was out the door, running late, completely rattled. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. This was just the beginning. Because now, I had done my part. The rest. That was up to fate. If she was still sneaking around, if she was using those condoms I had tampered with, then it was only a matter of time before the real consequences hit her. And when that happened, I would be right here, watching it all unfold. Emily's presentation was a disaster. I didn't need to be there to know that. I could see it all over her face when she came home that evening, flustered, exhausted, and on the verge of tears. She barely even looked at me as she dropped her bag by the door and went straight to the bedroom, shutting the door behind her. I acted oblivious, pretending to be busy with work, but inside, I was savoring every second of her downfall. She had spent weeks bragging about this moment, talking about how it could change everything for her career. And now, she had nothing to show for it. That was just the beginning. Over the next couple of weeks, I started noticing shifts in her behavior. She was quieter than usual, more distant. The late nights suddenly stopped. The extra enthusiasm about work? Gone. She wasn't staying late at the office anymore, and she wasn't hanging out with colleagues either. She was home. But she was nervous. I could see it in the way she constantly checked her phone, refreshing the screen, staring at something with a look of concern she tried to hide. Then, I saw it. One night, as she sat on the couch, I caught a glimpse of her phone screen. It was her period tracker app. She had logged a late notification. My stomach clenched, but I forced my face to remain neutral. I didn't say a word. Because I knew. The condoms. It had worked. Emily was late, and from the way she kept checking her phone, she was freaking out. The panic became even more obvious a few days later. One morning, she rushed to the bathroom. I heard her retching before she even closed the door. The sound of her throwing up echoed down the hallway. Pregnancy, sickness. I didn't need a test to tell me what was happening. She stumbled out of the bathroom, her face pale, avoiding my eyes. I must have eaten something bad, she mumbled. I just nodded. Yeah, must be. But I knew better. I watched as she spiraled, as the fear started creeping in. She tried to act normal, but I could see it. The way she spaced out, the way she suddenly started going on long drives alone, the way she avoided looking at me for too long. She knew something was wrong. And then, the final moment came. That night, as she sat curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone for the 100th time, I finally spoke. How does it feel? I asked. She blinked, looking up at me. What? I met her gaze, keeping my voice calm, steady. How does it feel to be carrying a child that isn't mine? Her face drained of color. I watched as the panic fully settled in. Her hands trembled as she tried to force out words. I don't know what you're talking about. Her voice cracked. I just stared at her. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need proof. We both knew the truth. Stop lying to me, Emily, I said, my tone colder now. You think I haven't noticed? The late nights, the excuses, the sudden work obsession? The way you've been acting lately? You thought I was stupid. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. I let the silence stretch between us before I leaned forward slightly. So tell me, was it worth it? Her lips trembled. Please, I can explain, she whispered. I laughed, shaking my head. No, you can't. And then, I stood up. Because I was done talking. It was time for her to face the consequences of her choices. Emily sat frozen on the couch, her face pale, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I could see the gears turning in her head, searching for a way out, scrambling for an excuse that might somehow fix this. But there was nothing to fix. She had made her choices. Now, she had to live with them. I stood there for a long moment, letting her sit in her own silence, letting the weight of it crush her. I wanted her to feel what I had felt when I found that condom in her car. I wanted her to sit in that same gut-wrenching realization that her world was about to collapse. Then, I turned and walked down the hall toward our bedroom. I heard her stumble to her feet behind me. Wait. Where are you going? Her voice was desperate now, shaking. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled open our closet and started yanking her clothes off the hangers. I grabbed her bags, her shoes, everything that belonged to her. One by one, I threw them into the hallway, piling them near the front door. I could hear her footsteps rushing toward me, but I didn't stop. Stop it, she cried, grabbing onto my arm. Please, let's talk about this. I wrenched my arm away, fixing her with a stare so sharp it made her flinch. We're done talking, Emily. My voice was calm, terrifyingly so. You don't get to come home to me, sleep in my bed, and carry another man's baby like nothing happened. She shook her head wildly, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to what? Cheat on me. I scoffed. That wasn't an accident, Emily. That was a choice. Her face twisted in pain, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her play the victim. I grabbed the last of her things and shoved them into a duffel bag before slamming it onto the floor at her feet. You need to leave. Her hands clenched into fists. I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem. Her breath hitched, her shoulders heaving. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I let out a bitter laugh. I'm doing this to you? Emily, you did this to yourself. She stared at me, as if trying to find even a sliver of the man who once would have done anything for her. But that man was gone. She killed him the moment she climbed into another man's bed. She sank to her knees, covering her face with her hands. Please, she sobbed. Please don't do this. I'll do anything. Just don't throw me out. I crossed my arms. You weren't thinking about this marriage when you were sneaking around, were you? I tilted my head. Now you suddenly care. She lifted her head, her face blotchy from crying. I made a mistake. I leaned down, lowering my voice to a whisper. No, Emily. You made a choice. And now you get to live with it. She let out a broken sob, rocking back on her heels, her entire body trembling. I straightened up, walking past her, my heart hammering in my chest. This was it. The final moment. I pulled open the front door and gestured toward it. "Get out." She blinked up at me, disbelief and desperation mixing in her gaze. "You're serious?" I nodded. "Dead serious." For a moment, I thought she might argue. That she might try to pull some last-ditch effort to manipulate me into letting her stay. But something in my face must have told her it was over. Completely, irrevocably over. With shaky hands, she grabbed her duffel bag, her breath hitching as she stepped toward the door. She paused in the doorway, turning back one last time. "What will people say?" she whispered. I met her eyes, completely unfazed. "That's your problem now." And then, without another word, I shut the door in her face. The moment I closed that door, the house fell into silence. For the first time in years, I was alone. And I liked it. I expected some part of me to hesitate, to second-guess my decision, to feel some shred of guilt over what I had just done. But there was nothing. No regret. No sadness. Just a cold, quiet satisfaction. Emily had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. For the next few days, she bombarded me with messages. At first, they were apologetic, begging, desperate. Then, when I didn't respond, they turned angry, accusatory. She started blaming me for everything that had happened, twisting the narrative in her head to make herself the victim. I didn't take the bait. She tried calling, tried showing up at the house, but I ignored her every time. She had nowhere else to go, her family lived states away, and most of her friends had no idea what she'd done. But that wasn't my problem. She did this. She destroyed our marriage. And I wasn't about to be her safety net. Then, a few weeks later, I heard the news. She wasn't pregnant anymore. Apparently, after realizing she was well and truly alone, Emily had made a decision. She went through with an abortion, likely hoping that erasing the evidence of her betrayal would somehow help her rebuild her life. But if she thought that was the end of her problems, she was dead wrong. Her family, deeply religious, deeply conservative, found out. And they disowned her. She had spent years painting herself as the perfect daughter, the ambitious, put-together woman who had everything under control. But now, she was nothing but a disappointment. She lost everything. Her husband, her home, her family, and her job. Well, turns out that career-defining project she had been working on? It had fallen apart because of the disastrous presentation she barely made it to. She had placed all her bets on it, and when she failed, her bosses saw her as unreliable. She was let go a month later. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I didn't have to. Life had a way of handing out karma better than I ever could. Meanwhile, I moved on. I threw myself into my work, reconnected with old friends, and focused on rebuilding the life she had tried to destroy. I started hiking, traveling, doing things I had put off for years while trying to be the perfect husband. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like the freedom that comes with realizing you no longer have to carry the weight of someone else's betrayal. Every now and then, I'd hear updates about her. How she struggled to find a job. How she burned bridges with the few friends she had left. How she was basically starting over from scratch. She had wanted a new life, hadn't she? Well, now she had one. And me. I was better than ever. I had learned the hardest lesson of my life. That trust, once broken, can never be repaired. That love alone isn't enough to hold a marriage together. That loyalty isn't just about staying, it's about respecting the person you're with. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this. I'll never settle for anything less than what I deserve again. Because the next time I fall in love, it'll be with someone who actually knows what loyalty means. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.